Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CDL podcast. This is, as you guys all, I'm sure know, is the post-London show. And what an interesting event it was. I think you all know why I'm saying that. And we're going to try something a little bit different in this episode. Rather than go individually into each match and talk about the score and what happened in each match like we normally do, I'm going to go down the bracket, starting from whoever was on the top of the bracket. So it won't be in order from first to eighth or eighth to first or whatever. It'll just be in order. So I think London was the top team in the bracket, and we're just going to go team by team and quick touch on their weekend overall. Because you guys have seen the matches. That's why you're watching this. I mean, you're into competitive COD. You've seen the matches. And you don't need me to recap each one for you. You've obviously watched them. And I want you to let me know if you like this new format. The bracket's still going to be up in a second here. I'm going to put it up after we go over the point standings and stuff. And that'll be in the background if you guys need to reference or refresh your memory on how a certain team did. If you can't remember what team won what series or what team came out as the winner of their group or the loser, that'll be up in the background. But we're going to try this new format where we just kind of go team by team and kind of talk about their weekend. For the teams that went 0-2, didn't do a whole lot, we obviously won't touch on them. And then for the teams that had more of an interesting weekend, we'll touch a little bit more on them. So let me know if you guys like that new format. Then before we get started with all the content in this episode this week, be sure to go follow the Twitter in the description. We had some of you guys go follow that. We had some interaction with a few of you through tweets and DMs and stuff, and it was really awesome to connect with some listeners of the podcast, because I'm just like you. I'm a COD fan. I've been a COD fan for a long time. Obviously my opinions are never 100% right, and honestly you guys might disagree with them, you might agree with them, and you might just like to talk Call of Duty, and you might not have as many people, some of my close friends like competitive COD, but other than that I don't have as many people to personally talk to, especially in a time like now when we really aren't seeing as many people in person and stuff. So it's kind of fun to just interact with you guys and talk some Call of Duty and just connect with you guys on more of a personal level, because at the end of the day it's not all Call of Duty in life. So kind of having some conversations with people and where they're from was pretty cool to me. And then be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and also, most importantly, I always say it, comment your thoughts on some of the takes I offered in this video and some of maybe takes that I didn't offer that you have. And I know one person talked about the FaZe roster in one of the comments, and that refreshed me on a point that I had. So sometimes it'll give me even more content to add into the video. And then also, if you're new and you enjoyed this video or other videos you've seen on the channel, please subscribe if you haven't done so. The comments obviously really keep me going and motivated to continue with content, and we're actually approaching a goal of mine, which I thought I probably would never reach if I did this podcast. I thought maybe we'd have a few people that listen and I could have conversations with them, but we're actually getting kind of close to the 100 subscriber mark. So if you guys could sub if you're new and help me to hit that big milestone, that'd be pretty awesome to me. But before we get into the team reviews that I talked about, the new little format of the weekend, we're going to quick take a look at the point standings. So I'm going to pull that up right now, and then we are going to go over individual teams after that. So looking at the points standings, here we've got FaZe still in first, although they didn't play with 250. Then Empire 240, Huntsmen 220, and Mutineers 220 tied. This top four is obviously locked, and all four of those teams are going to be at the next event, which makes it super interesting. And then the other four teams that are at the event are more of your bottom teams as of right now. So it's looking more and more likely that I think they're not. Three of them aren't in the same group, so it looks like we could have all four of those teams in the semifinal. They could be in the same group. I haven't really looked at the groups yet for it, so if they are, that does kind of suck. But if they aren't, there's a pretty good chance they make it out. But if you look at the top four here, so obviously if Atlanta is able to win the event, they're obviously the first seed because they're the leader, and if they win, they'd get the most points. If Atlanta was to lay a dud and not win a match somehow, and Empire just gets out of their group, they would take over first place, it looks like. As long as Empire wins the event, they're also guaranteed first place for champs, because obviously if they win the event and they play FaZe in the final, FaZe would gain 30 points to put them at 280, and Empire would gain 50 to put them at 290. And then if Huntsmen win the event, that would put them at 270. So they would need FaZe to not make it to finals to also be at 270, and then they would need Empire to not make the finals. If Empire makes the finals, they get 30, and they'd also be at 270. So best case scenario for Huntsmen is they win the event, and then Empire and FaZe do not make it to the final. Then obviously same thing for Mutineers. Best case scenario for them is if they win the event, and then FaZe and Empire only make it to semis and not the final, they'd also be at 270 and tied. And then I don't know how tiebreakers will work, but obviously it's very unlikely that Huntsmen and Mutineers take over the first place, but the best case scenario for them would honestly be if they played each other in the final, and then One of them would be at 250, one would be at 270, and then the other two would be at a maximum of 270 since they only made the semifinal. But that's a lot of what ifs, and we'll see that more as we go to the event. I'm sure the CDL will have some sort of like what if scenario like you see for the playoffs in like regular sports and stuff. And then at 5, the Subliners with a disappointing weekend. They're at 140 with a little bit of a comfortable lead. They are done. Obviously, the team closest to them that still has matches remaining is the Rocker. They are at 120. I don't see the Rocker being able to hop the Subliners because that would require them to make the final, and I don't think they're going to do that. I don't know how the tiebreaker works between those teams. Once again, if the Rocker make it out of their group at the next event, they would be tied with the Subliners. However, they could jump London and take over the sole possession of 6th place because London is done until champs now, and the Rocker just need to win one match. So depending on who they play, they could do that. I mean, they're a good enough team to win a match. And then down in 8th here, we've got Paris Legion with a big jump from 30 points. They are done, although they did give themselves a decent lead here because if you look at number 9, Optic has an event left to play, but in order to tie Paris, they'd have to get out of their group, which with the amount of tough teams, the top 4 teams in this event, it's not a guarantee that Optic gets out of their group. It could be very tough for them. And then Optic would have to make it all the way to the final to outright pass them because 30 points for 2nd place would put them at 110. And then Ultra, 30 points for 2nd place would only tie them with Paris. So they'd have to make the final to tie or win the event to pass Paris, which I don't think Ultra is going to. If Ultra wins an event that has Florida, Chicago, Empire, and FaZe at it, I will be shocked. And then Gorillas are done, and Surge would have to win the event just to tie Paris. And Surge winning the event would be the most Modern Warfare thing ever, the most nuts thing ever. An event that includes Optic, Minnesota, Florida, Huntsmen, Empire, FaZe. If Surge somehow wins it, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. But there's the points. Obviously, the top 4 can't be shaken up, like we said last week. I don't see too much shaking up in the middle. If I had to make a prediction, I think Rocker will win at least one match, and they'll probably hop London. So I bet you the final standings, the top 4, I don't know. I don't want to get into it. I have a feeling Empire might end up 1. But I think Subliners will stay at 5. I think Rocker will jump to 6. I think Ravens will drop to 7. And I think there's a decent chance Paris actually ends up staying at 8 now. I can't believe that. But yeah, now we went over the points real quick. I'd like to pull up the bracket here in just a second and kind of talk about how individual teams played. So we're going to pull that up quick and then go kind of from top to bottom. All right, so here for the individual teams, the team on the top of the bracket here, as you can see, obviously is London. So we're going to kind of go over their weekend as a whole. They were able to make it out of their groups in winners. They had that obviously super unfortunate series versus Surge where they were up 2-1. Surge were up by a little bit in the first map. Slack legged out. You know how it went. And they kind of got a free win there. I still think even if Slacked stays in the game there, I still think London probably wins that series. It's not like it was like 220 to like 50 they were winning and then Slack legged out and they won a 4v5. Slack legged out really early. It was like 60 to 40 roughly. So I mean, London could have very easily still won that hard point. And honestly, if it goes to a Game 5 search, my money's on London anyways. Still unfortunate, but London still probably wins that despite the leg out. And then they have a super impressive win 3-2 versus Florida. Obviously get taken out 3-2 to Paris. But the team honestly looked amazing in comparison to what we've seen from them recently. They blew it versus Paris, obviously. That round 10, I believe it was offensive strategy where they basically just sat and spawned, was absolutely horrible. I don't know who called that. It was a choke Game 5, to be honest. They should have beat Paris and been in the final. I don't think they beat Dallas, but it's an extra 10 points, which for them gives them a 10-point lead on Minnesota and puts the pressure on Minnesota to make it out of their group. So it would have been huge. Zero did have an amazing event. He had a 1.07 overall KD, and he looked to be back to the player that I know and love. I mean, I think Zero, honestly, is probably my favorite European player. Growing up in, obviously, the USA, America, I followed the American teams more closely, especially because early on in COD, the European scene wasn't nearly as big, or it really didn't compete as well with NA, but obviously now they're on the same level pretty much. And to me, Zero was always just like that top echelon of European players since I watched him, and I'm a really big fan of him, so it was kind of good to see him kind of back to the form I believe he can be. Unfortunately, I think he's best as a main AR, but in his role that he played, he looked very, very good. And then Scraps probably had his best event of the year with a 1.23, and then Wuskin was obviously as consistent with a 1.26. I feel like if Dylan could just, Dylan's still a really good player, but if he could just get, obviously, if he's as good as he is as BO4 Dylan, they're like an event-winning team because BO4 Dylan was one of the best players in the game. But if Dylan could just get up to the level I know he can be at, I feel like London has a really good chance to turn things around, and it seems like they are turning things around. And then the next team in the bracket, obviously, probably had the most unfortunate situation of the tournament. It's the Surge. Obviously, like we just talked about, that first match versus London, I still don't think they win it if Slack doesn't leg out, but the situation was absolutely unacceptable. It doesn't make it any better that they probably wouldn't have won. They might have won that map 4, like I said, but I don't think they would have won map 5. That still doesn't change the fact that that's completely unacceptable for the league, that ruling. But we're going to talk about that more in detail when I get to like my takeaways and hot takes, so I don't want to go into it too much now. Proto had a really tough weekend. He had a .73. Obviously, he's an entry sub, and they had a very low sample size, so the KDs can't be taken as much into account, and he hasn't played much this year, but that's pretty tough to see a .73, even for an entry sub. Panda actually played a little better. I think he had around like a .95. He looked a little bit more comfortable on some of the maps I saw. He had an AR in his hand more often, and he just looked a lot more comfortable on the map. It was good to see him play well because I know he is a pretty good player, but he hasn't really showed it as much this year. So maybe him getting into form with Octane playing pretty well, and then Apathy and Slack finding their form for champs could see this team improve. Slack and Octane were good as usual. I would have liked to see them bounce back. Obviously not in that series because how are they going to win a 4v5 hardpoint? But maybe in their next one, maybe like not let the frustration get to them as much. But I mean, I think it's just been a pile up year of frustration. I mean, Karma retired from the team. They haven't been able to get anything going all year. I mean, they've won 5 matches all year. And they're a team of, I mean, legends, COD champs and stuff. I mean, people that have won multiple rings are on their team. They have people who have won multiple tournaments and stuff and been top players in so many different titles. And even Apathy complained on Twitter, so you know it's pretty bad. I still somehow think they might have a chance to bounce back for champs. They just have champs players in their team that play well. And obviously they didn't have easy matches either. They lost to London, who ended up going to the semifinal. And then they lost to Optic, who looked improved and played pretty much all their matches tough. So a rough weekend from Surge. Super unfortunate situation. I somehow still think they have a salvageable way to maybe win a match or two at champs. I don't know why. It's just a team with Octane, Apathy, and Slack they'll never count out. And then the next team down in the bracket, Optic, they showed some promise. The bracket's wrong here. I don't know why. This is the bracket that's uploaded on the CDL Twitter, like from the final from the home series. I have no idea why it says Optic won 3-2 versus Florida, and then Florida moved on, because Florida won 3-2. I don't know why they posted this so many times wrong, but they did, and it didn't seem like they posted another picture that was fixed, so I'm going to go with this one. But obviously, Florida did win 3-2. It's not a glitch in the bracket that Florida moved on after losing. They did win this. And then Optic went down, beat Surge 3-1 like they should have, and then they lost to Florida again 3-1. The weekend was kind of a mixed bag of emotions for them. They showed some promise, but also a lot of frustration. Draza and Hollow both had like 0.9, 0.91s in their first event, which isn't bad, especially considering they played Florida twice. Obviously, Florida coming into this event was probably everyone's best team in the game. They still might be your best team in the game. They played a super tough match. For them to both get 0.9s playing such high caliber players in their first ever event isn't too bad, which is kind of some of the bright spots. And then Slasher was a bit below the level that I know he can be. He had like a 1.0 exactly, I think, which obviously, you know how I feel about Slasher. I think he's like so talented and so good at COD every year that a 1.0 is just too low for him, but obviously a small sample size. They only played 3 matches. And they expressed a lot of extreme frustration with servers and stuff, and we're going to get into a little bit of Slasher's unfortunate frustration later in the podcast when we do the take section. So like I said, they showed some promise, but their connection issues still linger. I'd like to see them maybe like take up offers. I know I've seen like Sensor offered Slasher to come to New York for champs. I'd like to see players on the team maybe take up that offer and move somewhere for like a month or two. Obviously, if they do it safely with all the restrictions with COVID and stuff, if they do it safely, I'd like to see them move because this team has so much damn potential and that's just not being realized. I still have some faith that they can be a team that can make a run at champs, especially because they did lose to Florida twice, and there's no shame. I mean, they took them to a Mat 5 once, a Mat 4 another time. There's no shame in losing to Florida. Everybody's been doing it for the last month or so. But the other side of the issue, they have been showing promise, so I have faith. But also, they did only beat the Surge this weekend. So, I mean, the Surge are a team that's pretty much chalked. So, I mean, it's kind of like to be determined still on this new Optic roster. Then the next team down the bracket is Florida, and Florida finally looked vulnerable and human this weekend. They beat Optic twice to get out of groups. Obviously, Optic's no slouch of a team, but they're not like a top team. They did lose to London 3-2, a close match, and it's not like losing to London is something like to be super ashamed of. I mean, London's like probably the 5th or 6th best team in the league at this point, so it's not something like super horrible to lose to them. However, they did lose in a pretty much smoked fashion, 3-0 to Dallas. But also, to be fair, kind of like last event with New York on Sunday when they went undefeated, Dallas went undefeated on Sunday and looked unbeatable. I think it's an extreme overreaction to say that Florida were overrated from the last 2 events. They still made the semifinal. They were smoked by Dallas, but Dallas is another top team. I mean, last event, FaZe was absolutely smoked by Huntsmen. Do I think that means that Huntsmen are head and shoulders above FaZe? No. Just like I don't think this means that Dallas is head and shoulders above Florida. But Florida's had a human event. Fero was absolutely disgusting this weekend. He had a 1.27, and then people were saying, oh, Awakening, the cheater, he finally played horrible, maybe because they have the cams now so he can't cheat. I mean, the dude had a 1.12. It's not like he had like some horrible event. It might not have been up to the standards that he's shown for his first 2 events, but those standards, I mean, if you're asking a guy to live up to winning an event every single time he plays, it's just not realistic standards, especially with the insane amount of competition that's in today's league. He still had a 1.12. He played well. Florida fans, I know there's a couple people that comment pretty often on the videos that are Florida fans and stuff, and you have nothing to be worried about. I mean, I still think Florida has an extremely good shot to win this next home series, and I think they have an extremely good shot to win champs or at least finish in that top 4. I still think they're a top team in the game. They probably just had an off series. Maybe the servers were a little off for them on that Sunday. They played a team that was red hot in Dallas. I think Florida has nothing to worry about. I still think they're a top team. I still think Fero's an MVP candidate. I think Awakening is a great player. Skies has been great. And then Fero and Havok filled their roles perfectly. I think they have nothing to worry about. But finally, they looked human, which was good to see. I think a loss for them almost might be good because they're top 4 in points anyways, so they get that bye. And I mean, maybe to be like a wake-up call that they need to grind for champs, maybe a loss actually could be good for them instead of kind of being riding on a high and like thinking they're unstoppable. Maybe a loss is good for them. I really don't think this is a panic button time at all for Florida. All right, the next team on the bracket is clearly the most shocking from the weekend. What the hell happened with Paris? They came out of nowhere. The funny thing is, though, if you look at their stats, shout out to Easy Mac. I'm in his Google Doc right now looking at the stats. If you look at them, they had like the worst overall KD in the event next to the Gorillas. And this could be partially due to that horrible map 1 where like everybody was like triple neg on their team in the first series versus Dallas, or even the map 3 Dom when I think they were all like super neg 2 versus Dallas. And then also in the final, they got smoked in both respawns and search. So that could have obviously really hurt their KDs. But I think like Dens had the highest KD on the team, yeah, with a 0.99 overall. So they didn't even have anybody with a 1 KD or higher. They had a bunch of 0.9s and 0.8s and stuff. Dens looked solid as a main AR, as always. Shocks impressed me a ton with a lot of clutch plays, and Luca was really good in search. Kismet and Zed were making plays, especially Zed as an entry. He was making some amazing plays. They finally showed life. Tons of clutch plays, like I said, especially against London. They probably shouldn't have won that Game 5 against London, but they did, and they clutched up, so props to them. And now they're in winners as of now for champs with a 20-point lead on the next team, and it's pretty realistic that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, unless Optic makes it out of their group or Toronto is able to like win the next event or something, or at least get to the final, it's pretty likely that Paris are going to be in the 8th spot and be the last team that comes out of winners. So this event was huge for them. I mean, I don't think Paris is going to make that much noise at champs anyways. I still don't think they're good enough to beat all the top teams consistently, but for them to give themselves a cushion where they can start a little slow at champs and lose a series rather than one series and they're done is absolutely huge for them. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Obviously, their stats, they had almost like the worst stats individually and KD-wise and stuff for players in the tournament, but they were clutch. They look like they could possibly be the best search and destroy team in the game right now, or up there with the best search and destroy teams in the game. They're right up there. They impressed me a ton. They came out of nowhere. We'll talk about them a little bit more later, probably, when we get into the power rankings. But yeah, Paris, out of nowhere. I've been trashing them all year. Time for me to stop trashing them. I mean, it's not like they had a super easy bracket. I mean, obviously they did beat the LA Gorillas, which aren't a good team. Then they 3-0'd the defending champ Subliners and then beat a good, hot London team 3-2. So, I mean, impressive weekend for Paris. I'm shocked to say the least, and I got to eat my words on calling them trash all the time because, you know what? They stuck with this roster, and I'm not saying they're some great team now or they're going to win an event, but hey, they clutched up when it mattered, and now they're in the winner's bracket for champs more than likely. Then the next team down is Dallas, obviously the event winner. They were dominant. First series of the weekend in the new meta, they lost the map to Paris. I think it was that Game 2 search. And then they 3-0'd Subliners, 3-0'd Mutineers, and 3-0'd Paris. Obviously, the final was a little bit lopsided with the whole server issues. We'll talk about that now. I don't think I'm going to talk about that too much when I get down to my takes section. But obviously, it was unacceptable. I think they said, like, even Clay tweeted after the game and saying what happened with the servers was unacceptable. The options were, like, California, Chicago, and Texas. I think, like, 4 of Paris's players are in California, so obviously with 4 of the players on Dallas being in Dallas, they're going to veto the California server, obviously. And then Paris was left to either have horrible ping on a Chicago server, or they were left to play on a Texas server where basically 4 of the Dallas players would be playing on LAN, essentially. And they vetoed the Chicago one, so they all wouldn't have horrible connection. And then they were stuck playing on the Dallas server. They got absolutely smoked. I still think Dallas probably 3-0s, or at worst 3-1s them in that final, but it was just kind of sucky to have the servers play such a big factor in the final, because obviously we want connection to play as little factor as possible in every game. And I know before the event I might get clowned. I said I questioned Dallas in the new beta, but to be fair, that was when it was 3 AR or even 4 AR on the map. In this new meta this weekend, it was basically almost always 2 AR and 3 subs, which fits them perfectly. I mean, if that would have been what I anticipated with like the 10mm and stuff, I would have predicted Dallas to be a lot better. I probably would have had them meeting New York. I think I had New York versus Dallas in the semifinal. I would have had Dallas winning because Crim is more comfortable with an AR, and then they have 3 more natural sub players in Shottzyy and Huke, who can play super fast. Couldn't say Huke there for a second. And then Illey, who's obviously also a little bit more natural with a sub that likes to play fast. And those 3 can fly, while Clay stays in his main AR role, and then Crim feels more comfortable with an AR. So this meta fits them perfectly. If this is the meta that goes all the way through to champs, I mean, this team is scary. It's like the most picture-perfect meta for them, 2 AR, 3 sub. And this was easily the best event I've seen Illey play. He had a 1.2, and Crim had the lowest KD on the team with a 1.15, which is insane. I would love to know, just like I would love to know if a team has ever made a final in a tournament. Obviously, stats are a lot more detailed when you have so many more matches in the old tournament format before the CDL and the CWL, but I'd love to know if there's a team that ever made a final with all KDs below 1 like Paris, and I'd love to know what the old lowest KD for a team in the final, because there's no way that a team made a final in any previous event, like open events that had 32 teams or whatever in the past. There's no way that somebody made it to a final with a 1.15 as the lowest KD on their team. That's nuts. They were just dominant all weekend with a 12-1 map count. Not much else to say. You'll see how I feel about them in my power rankings in a little bit. The New York Subliners, what the hell happened? The meta didn't switch that much. I mean, it went from like mostly 3 ARs to mostly 2 ARs. Mac had his worst event in a while with a 0.96, but I mean, let's give the guy a break. He had to look human eventually. He's been unreal since they picked him up. He had a little bit of an off event. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say he's trash all of a sudden, like some of you might jump on him. Mac just had an off event. Everybody's got to look human at some time. This was his event to do that. Attach still played super well. He had like a 1.08, I think. I think this was just an off weekend for them. But at the same time, I don't want to completely write it off as an off weekend. They've looked on and off all year, and then last week, it seems like they got really hot on a Sunday. That might have been an overreaction to call them one of the best teams in the game. I still had them at 5 because I didn't want to overreact to it, and I think this just shows that putting them in like the 5 spot in my power rankings was correct. Because I know Paris played well this weekend, but for a defending champ New York team that should be fighting for like a top 4 spot in the league, like a top 4 team in the power rankings, for them to not make it out of a group that had the Gorillas and Paris in it, who were probably the 11th and 12th ranked team coming in, is pretty alarming. Coming into this weekend, those were easily the 2 worst teams, and New York was coming off an event win. So this is an alarming weekend for New York. Not going to completely write them off as a team that can't win anymore, but it's pretty alarming for them to have a meta change and then all of a sudden not even be able to make it out of a group that included probably the 2 worst teams in the league coming into it. Then the last team, there's not much to talk about. It's the Gorillas. They were just bad. Like I said, there's not much to talk about. I really don't have anything to say about them. At this point, just put Hecz in the lineup. Obviously, they shouldn't do that because he hasn't played all year. I'm sure he hasn't touched the game in months. But damn it, for the champ storylines, just put Hecz in the lineup. I mean, if they're going to suck and be the worst team in the league, at least make it fun with Hecz, maybe being able to pull off an upset against Optic or even the Huntsmen or something. Just give me something fun to watch. Just throw Hecz in, why not? Obviously kidding, they're not going to do that, I'm sure, because he probably hasn't touched the game in months. He'd probably be pretty bad with no practice, but just give me the storylines. All right, so now that is done, we are going to move on to the MVP segment quickly. My losing team MVP is interesting. To me, the most valid answers, like I said, I like to go with semifinal teams. So our semifinal teams were London, Paris, Empire, and Florida. Oh yeah, by the way, I got Empire and Florida right for my semifinal teams, but then I had OGLA instead of London and Subliners instead of Paris. I mean, I don't think any of you would have predicted anything else. I think you would have all predicted Subliners to come out over Paris and LAG, so that one, whatever. But I've been saying all year how high I am on London. I'm like, London's such a good team. They just always get bad matchups. And then all of a sudden, the one time, I'm like, yeah, London's finally going to, they're going to lose again, not make it out of the group. I'm going to pick a bold one, Optic. Of course, London makes it out. So my predictions weren't great for this one. It's been a little bad streak of predictions for me. But anyways, the losing team MVP, to me, it's super interesting. London's one of the semifinal teams, so you got to look at their team. Obviously, if you pick Scraps as the MVP, super valid. He had a 1.23. I think I said earlier, his best event of the year, probably easily. Wuskin another 1.26. You can make an argument for him. Zero showed huge improvement with a 1.07. You can make a legit argument for him. To me, the most likely MVP candidate for a losing team that you guys are probably going to pick, and I'll have no argument against it, is Fero. The dude had like a 1.27. He's been MVP form basically since he joined the team. He was absolutely nuts this weekend. If you picked him as your losing team MVP, no problem. But I didn't want to go with the boring Fero pick, the most obvious pick, or the boring Wuskin pick. Like I've said, if they make a semifinal, he could do it. I didn't want to go with the boring pick because, I mean, those guys are clearly MVPs of their team in their own right. But I'm going to do something else. Paris hasn't won more than like one match in a weekend in like months. I mean, maybe not even since LAN. Hell, they could barely win a map. I mean, most weekends they were getting 6-0'd, maybe 6-1'd. For the weekend total, they were going 1-6 map count, 0-6 map count. And then all of a sudden, this tournament, they made it to the finals. And like I said, they beat some decent teams in like London and in New York, some middle of the pack, like 5-6 teams. And I think I have to give somebody on that team, losing team MVP. And I'm going to go Shocks. To me, you could argue anyone on the team but Dens, because Dens obviously had the best KD, but he has the easiest role. He's had a good KD all year, and it was lower than it normally is. And then Shocks just seemed to be making all the clutch plays for the team. He had the biggest games. He had a 0.95 overall KD, which doesn't seem like MVP level, but like I said, the highest KD on the team was Dens with a 0.99, so nobody had much better than that. He had a 0.86 in hardpoint, a 1.11 in S&D, and then a 1.07 in Dom, which is by far the best on the team in Dom. And then Luca obviously has a case for MVP with his S&D play, which was also insane. And then Zed for his entry, which was crazy, crazy good. I mean, Zed was making like so many 2 pieces on entry and stuff this whole weekend. Played extremely well. But to me, Shocks was the most consistent. The other guys were great picks. Like I said, the guys from London or Fero could easily be your losing team MVP. But just because of the fact that Paris hadn't even been like out of the group or out of like the first match, the first round in so long, and then all of a sudden they make a final, I feel like you have to give somebody on the team props and say somebody was the MVP for that big of a change. To go from worst to almost first, you got to give somebody in the team some props. And then the winning team MVP is also a little bit controversial and different than most of you would probably say. I'm going to go with Illey, I think. Now, obviously, Shottzyy has his argument for the winning team MVP because he had the best KD in the tournament with a 1.29, not just Dallas, but the best in the tournament. But we've pretty much seen, especially since the online shift, we've pretty much seen Shottzyy be the best KD on the team and be the most consistent and stuff. So to me, the MVP was Illey or Crim because we haven't seen them from them. The Empire have looked like a top team all year with Crim and Illey both being around like a 0.95. And they both turned up this weekend. Crim had a 1.15, and then Illey had a 1.20. So that's like roughly like a 0.2, 0.3 increase in their normal KD than they have in the year. And then this allowed them to go from looking like a top 4 team to a dominant team. And these two were the key factors in that because Clay had played roughly the same he's played all year. Huke was dominant and roughly the same he's been all year. Shottzyy was dominant and the same he's been all year. But then Crim and Illey went from 0.9s and being good to being like 1.1, 1.2, really, really good players. So to me, they're the 2 key factors in turning them from top to dominant. So one of them has to get MVP, and I think Illey had more of an impact than Crim. So I got to go with him for MVP. Like I said, he had a 1.2 overall, a 1.21 in hardpoint, 1.1 in S&D. I think also in an S&D game, he had like the second highest amount of sniper picks in a single game in CDL history. I think it was 9. Which is, I mean, nuts, especially in this game. It's not a great sniping game. You can't do as much with a sniper, not as many like quick scope and like quick kills. It's basically all long range, unlike last year. With the Paladin, you could get some crazy quick scopes and close range kills. It could bail you out of some situations. And then he had a 1.22 in Dom, which, like I said, for his KD to go from usually like around a 0.9, 0.95 to a 1.2, that's like a 0.25 or 0.3 improvement. That's crazy improvement. And to me, his improvement along with Crims, like I said, is the reason they go from top team to a dominant team this weekend. So now that the MVP segment is out of the way, we're going to go on to the power rankings. They've changed a little bit from last week. I think last week I still had Florida at 1 because they were still coming off back-to-back and didn't play. But they've switched up a little bit here. The top 4 has actually shifted a little bit. Dallas has got to be 1 for me right now. I think in the last one I had them at 4. I think my top 4 last week went Florida, Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas. But to me, Chicago and Dallas were roughly in the same kind of boat. And I was betting on Dallas not being as good in the 3AR meta, but now it's a 2AR. And FaZe has looked very vulnerable recently. FaZe, once again, could easily beat any of these teams. Any of these top 4 teams could beat each other. But to me, Dallas now has 3 event wins, which is tied for the most. With Florida, they looked almost unbeatable this weekend. They went 12-1 map count. And it's not like they beat a bunch of horrible teams. They 3-0'd Florida. They beat New York, who was a good team. And overall, actually, I don't think they played New York. They played Paris, was it? Oh yeah, they did 3-0 New York. I had to refresh my memory on the bracket quick. So Dallas, I mean, they beat New York. They obviously beat Paris, who's not as good. They 3-0'd Florida. They looked pretty much unstoppable, and if Crim is going to be in that form and Illey's going to be in that form for the rest of the year, to me that almost makes them the best team. And since they did 3-0 Empire in the most recent matchup, we still have to kind of put them ahead of Mutineers, I'd think. And that's where I'm going to go at 2. I go Mutineers 2 because still they've been more consistent recently than they've dominated FaZe recently, honestly, in their matchups. And they've also beat Huntsmen in I think the last 2 or 3 matchups they've played them. They've been better lately, and overall they have more wins on the year. They still looked really strong this weekend. They were just beat by a red-hot Empire team. So to me, they've got to be 2. And then almost right now, I think that Florida and Empire might be I like to do the tiers. I think I'm going to both keep all 4 of the top teams in tier 1, but I think to me, Empire and Florida are 1A. And then my number 3 team, Chicago, is in 1B, along with FaZe in 1B. So I have Chicago 3 and Atlanta 4. You all know how I feel about Atlanta. I think they're the most talented team in the game, regardless. But lately, they've just been playing so boneheaded at some points. They seem so poor at certain points in the game. They just don't seem to have, I don't know, in-game decision-making for them doesn't seem to be that great. So I have them at 4 and Huntsmen at 3, especially because in the most recent matchup, the only matchup we've seen between those 2 teams this year, Huntsmen absolutely world-starred them 3-0. It wasn't even close, really, any of the maps. So for that reason, I have them in a tier 1B because I think they're just a little bit below Florida and Empire right now, both Huntsmen and FaZe. But like I said, this 1 through 4, if FaZe comes out and dominates the next event with all 4 of them at, FaZe could jump to 1. Especially at Champs, it's becoming more and more about the year and a lot more about recent form, because usually the teams that are in the best recent form around Champs seem to be the team that's really good, not a team that's been good all year and now seems like they're 4. So FaZe is kind of trending in the wrong direction, but I have to keep them at 4. And then we had a shift in our 5 and 6. I'm moving London up to 5 and then dropping New York to 6. I think London was better in the beginning of the year, and then New York kind of overtook that spot. And now New York's been a little better recently, and London's been on a downfall. But London should have easily been in the final. They choked that match against Paris. And then New York was 3-0'd by Paris. This is why I didn't put New York a little higher last time. Because I said I need to see a little bit more consistency out of them. They won that one event and had a super hot Sunday, but before that, they hadn't even really been in a final, I don't think. So I needed to see a little bit more consistency out of them. And to me, London just looked a little bit hotter this weekend. I have a little bit more faith in London right now. I think the AR shift might have hurt New York. Once again, I think Mac just had an off weekend. New York could easily jump London. But to me, this is a tier 2 alone, just London and Subliners. And right now I have London 5, Subliners 6. Like I said, I wouldn't have any problem with people putting Subliners 5. But to me, recent form just shows me London might be a little better, and the Subliners win might have been a little bit of a fluke. They're still a good team and a top 5, top 6 team, but I don't know that they're any better than the Ravens. And then starting out our tier 3, I think I've got Toronto at 7. I wanted to put OGLA here for the potential they showed, but we've got to give a little respect to Toronto, making it to the semifinal last event. Once again, they're in the start of the tier 3 at 7. They're a team that I feel like can make noise and beat a top team on any given day, but I wouldn't consistently bet on them to beat a top team. And especially since this last event includes the top 4, I wouldn't bet on them to win an event, but I think they can make a noise and sneak out of their group every once in a while. Then the only other team I have in this tier 3 kind of where they're a team that can beat a top team on any given day and maybe sneak out a semifinal or a final is OGLA. I I think their roster change is still a little bit questionable, especially with the meta shift and dropping 2 AR players in AR heavy meta. But I think they showed some potential here. Like I said, they lost to Florida twice this event, which is no shame. I mean, I think Florida is just a flat-out better team than them, so I think almost every time they play, they're going to lose to them. But I feel like OGLA is a team that will consistently be able to beat all the teams below them and then have upset potential. So they're in a tier 3 where, like, super outside chance to win an event and make some noise at champs, but also going to consistently beat the bottom teams, I think. So I have them at 8, rounding out tier 3. And then for the tier 4 teams, I think there's 2 teams in there. I have Paris at 9. This is like the first time Paris has ever been ahead of like 11 since like the first couple weeks of the season when they look good on LAN. I have them in the tier 4, which is like, to me, a team that has some upset potential. They can every once in a while beat a top team, but they're pretty much consistently going to play to the level of their competition. They're going to play all the middle of the pack and lower teams close. But I don't think they really have much event win potential. Obviously, they were in the finals of this event, but I think there's no way they're beating Dallas, even with the server thing that happened. So I have them at 9, starting the tier 4. Then at 10, I have the Rocker, another team that we always talk about. Super unfortunate. It seems like they've gotten so much worse online. But they're another team that I think will consistently, I don't think they'll really get blown out by any teams. They'll consistently play all the teams around them, like Toronto, Optic, Paris, Surge, Gorillas. They'll consistently play them strong and probably win a lot of the matches against the bottom teams. And then they'll play the top teams tough, but they'll have a little bit of struggle with them. Maybe can pull off an upset every once in a while, but I can't see them winning events. So I have them 10, rounding out tier 4. Then 11, I have the Surge, and 12, I have Gorillas. These is like the tier 5 teams. To me, they're teams that they're pretty much going to lose most of their matches. They don't have really any chance, which is sad because Gorillas for a second there looked like they had a chance to maybe hop into like that 8, 7, even 6 spot that one event, and then since then they've just been trash. They barely won a map since that tournament. And then Surge, I feel like Gorillas are just down in the trash and they're pretty much done. But I think Surge have like that super outside chance to maybe pull off a couple upsets and keep maps close. They're just so bad at search and destroy. But with the veteran players in their team, like I said, you can never count them out at champs. So that's what our power rankings are going to look like. Just to go over it one more time. It's Empire, Mutineers, Huntsmen, FaZe, Royal Ravens, Subliners, Ultra, OGLA, Paris, Rocker, Surge, and then Gorillas. The last thing we want to do in this podcast, we always get into hot takes and some takeaways from the weekend. So first, obviously, is the Seattle situation. So if you don't know what happened, obviously I'm sure most of you do. They were up like 60-40 or like 60-30 something or whatever it was, like roughly 20 or 30 points in the map 4 hardpoint, and then slacked legs out. And they played the rest of the map 4v5. Obviously they didn't get like any more points because they started screwing around with random guns, and you're obviously not going to win a 4v5 versus a pro team. And then the league said, nope, he lagged out. That's a player issue. You don't get a map reset. You don't get to replay the map. They said it's just a standard rule for all situations because they don't want players like unplugging their PS4s or purposely like lagging themselves out or turning out their PS4s so they could restart maps whenever. For me, for the league to have a blanket rule over maps restarts is just asinine. I think that map restarts should be on like a case-to-case basis. If you've got some dude that seems to be lagging out every single time that they're down by a bunch in a hardpoint or a search, then it's like, this is a little suspicious. But Slack is an established player, a veteran player, and they have PS4 cams and stuff for like the Cronus's now, so they can check if people are cheating and stuff. So you're telling me you couldn't just look at that cam and see if somebody unplugged their PS4 and it was a little bit suspicious? And also, if that's like your issue with it, why would the dude be unplugging his PS4 when they're up like 60-30 early in a hardpoint? It makes no sense. Go watch Octane's video. He discussed it. And like he said, COD fans have a tendency to just believe whatever they hear. But if you listen to it without bias and actually like think, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can easily go case to case. It's a situation they were winning. He legs out early in the map. You just restart the map. And the whole unplugging PS4 things, I just don't think it would happen because people would most likely, if they were going to do it, only do it when they were down a bunch late in the map. And if anybody did that and they were down like 220 to 100 and then somebody unplugged their PS4 or something or disconnected, it'd be super suspicious, especially if it happened multiple times. And to be fair, the Surge probably weren't winning a map 5 since they're so bad at S&D. So it's not like if they get this map restart, they're guaranteed a map win. But for them to not be granted a replay off something so simple like that, especially when they're winning the map, is just so dumb. That's easily a situation where we got to understand we're online. Things like this are going to happen. Slacked, it's not his fault that his internet happened to disconnect. He didn't purposely disconnect it or anything. To me, competitive integrity needs to be addressed by the league, because to put blanket statements on case-by-case type matters is just stupid, and the league needs to look at this. I mean, to me, it was unacceptable. Then next, I want to give a shout out to Lando and Studdy. I loved Studdy as a player. One of the people I always used to play competitive COD with. Not as much anymore, but still one of my good friends. Studdy was like his favorite player. He's mostly started watching around like BO3 when we started playing competitive with him, and Studdy was on LG and always making crazy snipes and stuff, wall running, hitting crazy snipes, and he loved Studdy. That was like his favorite player, so I've always kind of also had a love for him because of that. Studdy was one of my favorite players. I thought he was always super knowledgeable when he was on the desk as an analyst, and I thought he was fun about the way he was always kind of funny. He was super personable, always had good charisma. I always thought he was fun to listen to on the desk, and he had that good chemistry with like Pac and KD and Nameless and all those people on the desk. And this weekend when he was casting, I thought he was pretty good overall. He did sometimes kind of overtalk points on the casting, and as I'm sure everybody let him know, I saw on Twitter and stuff. He did, like I said, overtalk some of the points, kind of go into too long of an analysis on plays rather than giving him like the simple breakdown. But let's be honest, it's his first time casting, really. Give him a break. I thought overall he was very good. He showed a ton of promise. I think he's going to be a fantastic analytical mind breaking down the game. To say he's going to be like the level of Merk is kind of disrespectful to Merk because Merk's so good at it, but I think Studdy has potential to kind of hit that level at some point with experience, and as he gets used to kind of breaking things down in a more concise way, I think he's got a lot of potential. I'm super excited for his future as a caster, especially because he's got a lot of personality, which sometimes in announcers, especially in sports, they don't have the most personality, and it seems like guys with a lot of personality that can bring hype to moments are really fun. And then for Lando, he seems super polished. I think he could also be a great caster too. Sometimes I thought it did feel like he was trying to force like a radio or announcer voice a bunch rather than just like being himself, but he was still super good. I think he's got a ton of potential. He's a little bit more polished than Studdy was just because I think he has a little more experience, but I think both of them have extreme potential, and I think they're only going to get better with time, and I'm super excited to see how their duo works, whether they're just casting for the rest of this year, and then they're looking for new people at the end of the year, or these people are going to continue. Even if they continue, I'm excited to listen to both of them for a while. And this one has nothing to do with this weekend, but with the way I think about COD and stuff, I was just kind of thinking about this, honestly, while I was at work today. I was listening to some of the Codcasts. I was listening to that Chino one with Pac and Nameless, which is kind of where I got the idea from. And I was kind of thinking about that World War II phase team I talked about in podcast back. I thought if they would have put like Slasher instead of replays, even after they won, they had a chance to win champs. But I was kind of thinking like going into like next year or something, obviously not this year, but what if they switched out like Major Maniac as their main AR for a more like structured AR leader, like a Slasher, a Clay, Octane, or an Arcitys? Obviously these are all like the top ARs, so it's like, well, I mean, if you can get one of those ARs, why wouldn't you? But Major Maniac's also like talent-wise a top AR, so I could easily see why you'd be like, well, it's not that easy to get a main AR, and I don't think this is very possible because I'm assuming Slasher's option on Optic is going to be picked up, so he'll be there next year. I'm assuming Clay will be picked up by Dallas, so he'll stay there. I'm assuming Octane will stay on Seattle, and then they might just drop the rest of the roster and build around him. And then I'm assuming Arcitys will also be picked up because they're all top players. And also, there's literally no reason. I'm not saying Major Maniac needs to be dropped. There's literally no reason to drop him if they want to keep him. That's completely fine because he's one of the top talent ARs in the game, and he's just a super young and very good player, also super good at S&D. And also, I know he's good friends with the guys, so there's no reason to drop him. This is just hypothetical I was thinking about. But he's also the AR on the team. If the AR was anybody else on the team, like if, probably not selling him because he's so valuable, but let's say like Priest was the main AR, I'd say the same thing about him. It would be interesting because just for argument's sake, I always hear like Nameless and Pacman, or even Replays or Crowder, whatever you want to call him, the FaZe coach. I always hear them say that FaZe is so talented, but they play so brain dead because they have like no structure in game or no like real IGL. And I always have said like the concept of an IGL is a little overrated, but to have somebody that even maybe if they're not an IGL, but they allow you to be a little more structured, I think is pretty important. And I don't think FaZe has somebody like that right now. I'm not saying those players are stupid. I think they're extremely smart, but I don't think they have like last year, Simp and Abizi had guys like Arcitys and Clay to kind of like direct the troops, so they didn't have to do as much thinking about that, and they could just kill, and run around the map and make the correct plays with the help of those two. And then Major Maniac had guys like Mox, who's kind of a general on the map, helping him out last year when he kind of broke out. I'm trying to think of the last player. Priest, I mean, he played with Crowder when he first came up on World War II into the pro scene. and he had him helping direct him. Then last year he had like Slasher and Octane to help direct them. So I'm saying if they had like more of a like structured AR presence, and then even Celium last year came up with like who the heck was the main AR on that team? Like Zero and Zumon, players that know what they're doing, helping him out. So if they had like a more structured AR like Clay or Slasher, Octane, who's still probably as talented as Major Maniac, but with more IGL ability and leadership in game, to make them more structured, I feel like they'd literally be impossible. Like imagine one of those ARs I listed with Simp and Abizi in front of them sliding in, and then Celium's ability on the flex and Priest's ability on the flex. So like to me the most possible option, this is going to sound crazy, would be Arcitys. Chicago has literally no reason to drop Arcitys. But for some reason, I just have this weird feeling with Dashy being super unhappy on Optic and on the bench, and TJ seems unhappy. I just have this weird feeling that they might be headed to Huntsmen, maybe for the Twins at the end of the year. Obviously, if Huntsmen wins it all, I don't think they'll change, but I just have this weird feeling that like Dashy's going to be sitting out there as a free agent because Optic won't want him back. And then Scump's going to get in Hex's ear and be like, Dashy's like one of my best friends, and Hecz really likes him. Then all of a sudden they might pick him up. And I don't think they'll keep 3 main ARs on the team, so maybe Arcitys will be the odd man out or something. Obviously, there's no guarantee this happens. They might not pick up Dashy or TJ or anything. And Arcitys has no reason to be dropped. He's been super good all year, and he's such a good player and so good in game as a leader and just so consistent. But I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about. I feel like if FaZe had a more structured AR that was similar in talent to Major Maniac, they'd be literally unstoppable. Then this is like not much of a take really, but I'm excited to see how the talent transfers to next year, talking about young talent, to hopefully a more normal traditional COD with traditional spawns, traditional time to kill, no damage multiplying attachments and stuff. I think Illey and Shottzyy are franchise type players that are easily going to transfer, and also they have a better reputation. Shottzy's a Halo World Champ that's been good on LAN before, and was even picked up before the online switch. And then Illey's been a member of the Search and Destroy community forever, and he's always been known as a top prospect, just waiting for him to turn 18. So I think those two will still be on top teams, and they're like franchise type players, but I'm interested more like in Awakening and Mac, because they both didn't get onto the team until the online switch happened. They both have really no history of success on LAN. They're both very young, which could be a reason for that. And then they've also both been like some of the top players in the game this year online. They've been disgusting. I truly hope they're this group of like 4 or whoever is the next generation of stars. But for some reason, I have like a feeling that pros might not give like Awakening and Mac as much credit, because they'll be stubborn and say, hey, they're onliners, they haven't done it on LAN. And I think players like Vivid, who had a decent year, might be left back to the AM scene because people are going to say, well, he had his chance online and he didn't even play that well then. But I hope, I think Illey and Shottzyy are obviously going to get a chance, but I hope Awakening and Mac, especially if Mac and New York kind of have a bad end of the year now after this poor event, I hope they're still given a chance, if we're back on LAN, to play on top teams, because I think they deserve it. I think players sometimes put too much stock into online. Usually if you're this good online, you're at least going to be pretty good on LAN. And then lastly, the last thing I want to get into, I saw players like Slasher threatening a break or retirement if next year starts online again. And there's a good chance, honestly, it probably does with the way the world's going. I'm just praying it's good enough with a better server support from Treyarch to keep players in and the game being good enough, because we lost Karma this year to retirement, and players like Enable, Dashy, Chino, JCap, Hecz, Looney, and Gunless are all on the bench. These are popular veterans, and even some young guns with huge followings. I mean, think about, when you think of the most popular players in COD, obviously apart from like Scump and Formal and any of the, like the Optic boys, I mean, Karma's one of the most popular players. Enable's a super popular player. Dashy, especially from his time on Optic with Scump, is super popular. Chino's one of the most liked guys in the community. JCap's a legend and one of the most followed players. Hecz is the villain to the whole Optic story. I mean, he's one of the most popular players. Looney, not maybe as popular social media-wise, but one of the most consistent winners in COD over the last how many years. And then Gunless, another guy who's maybe not as popular social media-wise, but looked at as, every time he plays, he's like looked at as the best player or one of them. These are all guys who are like riding the bench, or Hecz might be close to retirement. Even Looney, even Cap might be close. Karma did retire. Enable might even be close to retirement. So I'm really hoping we can find a way to get back to LAN or have better server support next year, and these threats of retirement or breaks don't actually happen, because we can't afford to lose all these players towards the birth of the league. I know there's a bunch of young stars coming up, but if we lose guys with followings like that have a ton of fans, and the storylines they bring with Hecz, especially bringing the storylines, it's just going to be super unfortunate. So I hope those guys can find a good home next year. be on a good team with maybe a better game, hopefully some LAN or something, because we can't afford to lose these guys. But that is going to do it for the post-London show. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, and then please subscribe if you're new. Like I said, we're close to hitting a huge goal of mine, which is 100 subs. It'd be awesome if we could do that. And then also, most importantly, like I always say, comment down below with your thoughts on my points, and my thoughts on the teams and hot takes and power rankings as well. And as well as any of your other thoughts on everything CDL. If you have anything that I didn't mention that you think I missed, if you think I missed a point on one of my takes, if you have a different take to offer, then also any like COD related or really any questions you have for me. I know somebody in the last video asked, like, who is my favorite team or my favorite players and stuff, and that was super fun to answer. I kind of like answering your questions if you have any. And if they're one that I think I can go into enough detail in, maybe I'll just, like, throw it in one of the podcasts. I'll say, like, hey, I'll talk about this in the next video, or, like, stick with it for the next video because I'll put it in there or something. I loved answering those questions, and obviously love always interacting in the comments. Be sure to follow the Twitter that's in the description for more, like, live interaction during the events. Look out for a prediction video for our last home series, the Toronto home series coming out here. That's happening this next weekend, so that video will probably be out like tomorrow or the next day or something. Thanks for watching this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Look forward to your comments and responding to them as always. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you probably tomorrow or the day after for the Toronto home series predictions and pre-show. Thanks for watching.